All right, we are going live, everyone. All right, we are live and on the air. Today I have co-host Erin from the Unofficial SeaWorld podcast. How you doing, Erin?
I'm doing great, Eric. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. We're very excited. Today we've got some great stuff coming up.
And we also have Mark Simmons, the author of Killing Keiko. How you doing, Mark?
Pretty good, Eric. Thank you. Hi, Aaron.
Um,
We are we are very thrilled to have you, and we are thrilled to have like this live Q&A. If you are in the chat room, remember you can chat on the right-hand side of the screen. And go ahead and leave your questions and comments there, and then we'll hopefully engage with you. We'll get some of your questions and comments, and then hopefully we'll talk a little bit about Killing Keiko. And we're gonna we apologize for the technical difficulties. We're gonna give it a few seconds for everyone else to join in, as we kind of get this thing off and rolling. But first, while we're doing that, what we want to do is maybe talk a little bit about who Mark Simmons is, and go over his career a little bit. And so, Mark, if you'll indulge me. So Mark Simmons was, let's see here. I have your bio here. Oh, actually, before we get into that, so I just want to remind everyone this is brought to you by AwesomeOcean.com. And Awesome Ocean, just for everyone who might not know, is a website that celebrates our oceans and the hardworking people who are on the front lines of conservation at zoos, aquariums, and marine parks around the world. So just some rules about our Q&A. We want involvement, and we want to encourage you to involve and participate. And at the beginning of each segment that we're going to do, what we're going to do is we're going to ask you again to comment in the chat screen, ask questions about it, and just as a point of reference, negativity, bullying, slanderous comments will not be tolerated and will be deleted. Anyone posting negative, bullying, or slanderous comments will be blocked from further commenting. We want to have fun. We want this to be a great interactive experience for all, and so we ask that you tweet about and use the hashtag #KillingKeikoQ&A on Twitter, and feel free to tweet at OneAwesomeOcean or at Killing Keiko during the Q&A. And so as we again get going in this, Erin, do you want to go ahead and go over what is Killing Keiko as far as the book description, and then we'll talk about Mark, our author, and our friend here.
Okay, sounds good. Actually, let me grab my copy of said book. So for those who might not know or might not have gotten their copy, Killing Keiko is Mark Simmons' book about the true story of the Keiko release project and what happened and sort of what events transpired during the attempts to get Keiko, who's the very, very famous whale featured in Free Willy. He played Willy. Get him back and get him ready to go out into the wild. Of course, things kind of took a awful, horrible turn in the end, and Mark talks in detail in the book about why that exactly happened, what exact details and features played into the end result and what happened at the end. So it's really an engaging book, and really takes you inside this whole project, and you feel like you're there on that sea pen with Keiko, and you feel like you're watching him learn all those different things that he learned in an attempt to put him back out in the wild, and you really learn all of the characters that are involved in the book. So it's really heart-wrenching, it's really involved and immersive and really compelling, and if you want to know about Keiko, if you want to know about release of cetaceans, then it's really something you need to get your hands on.
I do completely agree. And so before we dive even further, I know we're going to let Mark chime in because that's who everyone really cares about listening to. But we want to go over Mark's bio for anyone who might not be completely familiar with Mark Simmons. Mark Simmons, he's worked in the field of applied and behavioral sciences for 28 years. As director of animal husbandry for the Keiko Release Project, Simmons authored and applied behavioral rehabilitation blueprint for the reintroduction that gained approval from the Icelandic Ministry of Fisheries for Keiko's former release. He assists governments on protective marine legislation, participates in ongoing research with marine mammals, and is heavily involved in the rescue and rehabilitation of sick and stranded animals. Mark has provided consulting on marine mammal health and assessment and recovery and training evaluation programs. and the development of zoological programs and project management at numerous agencies with the NOAA, the National Marine NMFS, and facilities worldwide in the United States, Mexico, Singapore, Bahamas, Dubai, Philippines, Iceland, Jamaica, Panama, China, and St. Lucia. He has taught marine mammal behavioral sciences at the University of Miami and conducted numerous seminars, public lectures on the Killing Keiko project. And as a silly side note, some people might recognize him from the 2013 movie Blackfish. He was the only voice of reason in that film. So we want to again welcome you, Mark, and we're going to have a lot of questions here for you as we kind of dive into this topic. So the first thing we really want to talk about is we want to talk about your early career, Mark, and so the first thing we want to know is why did you choose animals? Why did you choose to work with animals?
Well, first of all, thank you both for the summary of the book there, Erin and Eric, the introduction. You made me tired just listening to it. But yeah, you're asking what made me first interested with marine mammals?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's funny. I'm from the Virginia farm country, so at the age of 18, I visited SeaWorld, and I was like many kids that I'm a fish. I was in any body of water ever available to me, and I grew up around animals. So my two favorite things in the world, combined. When I saw this at SeaWorld, I was just absolutely fell in love with it, and I had to know these animals. So I went after it and got blessed and got that opportunity.
That's awesome. And so so again, so you start off obviously with the great SeaWorld story of it. And so while at SeaWorld, once you became a trainer, what animals did you work with?
Well, I started out with at the Whale and Dolphin Stadium, which at that time had bottlenose dolphins, Atlantic bottlenose dolphins. We had false killer whales, we had belugas, and we had white-sided dolphins. We also had a bride's whale that was in rehab. And we had, for a time there, we had a Stenella frontalis, a spotted dolphin. So a lot of different animals there. I was there for about a year, and then I went to Shamu Stadium and began working with killer whales, and that's where I stayed the rest of my career there.
Oh, that's awesome. So how long total were you at SeaWorld?
Just 10 years.
Just 10 years. Yeah.
Just a little.
Yeah. Well, I look back now, and I wish it had been longer. It seems like a blink of an eye.
No, that's pretty incredible stuff. So if you can maybe share, from your days of being a killer whale trainer, what were some of your favorite memories that you have of working with those animals at the SeaWorld parks?
Wow, many. There's something pretty special about animals when you work in a positive environment like that, where your coveted prize is that relationship, because it removes barriers. It removes barriers of fear and intimidation and other things, and it allows a pure relationship between you and that animal. And it's really more than just we all have our pets, and we all love on our animals, and we all know that relationship. But when you work with an animal and you're working together towards that common goal, there's some just powerful and unique bonds there that really hard to describe, quite frankly. But those relationships are sort of the foundation and the basis for everything. And then there's probably a million stories about. Yeah. A lot of the animals are really mischievous, and you can't tell me they don't have a sense of humor.
So when working with killer whales, as you're getting your first 10 years at SeaWorld, when you were working with them, what were some of maybe the things you learned about how to prepare them for a desired result behaviorally? Like what did you enjoy, I guess, about behavior and working with an animal's behavior that then has followed you through your entire life?
Well, behavior. There's a scene in The Matrix where Neo kind of all of a sudden realizes and has this epiphany, and it's where all of a sudden he sees zeros and ones in the walls, and he sees that there's this force that affects everything in our lives. And I look at behavior that way because we're animals too. Behaviors like gravity, it's everywhere. It's always present. It's always influencing us. And once you understand this with animals, and you understand how to lay the path forward for a positive and stimulating life, it's an amazing science. It is an absolutely amazing science. And by the way, it is a science. It is not an art form. It's an empirically defined science. It's been studied for over a century. And so behavior gives us a lot of access to creating healthy environments for animals, not only animals, but people. And all of the things that you've seen, Eric and Erin, in many of the parks that you've been to, working voluntarily with the animals to do things that just blow your mind.
No, it's obviously it's incredible, what you guys have done, and what people have been able to witness, obviously the relationships.
So on that note, talking about that kind of behavior and the empirical nature of behavior, do you find that those same principles that you really established when you were working at SeaWorld with all those different species, were those the same principles that you sort of carried through your career to everything else that you've done with your company, with Keiko, and everything else that you sort of had your hand in?
Yeah, absolutely, Erin. And by the way, they're not SeaWorld principles. They are the principles of behavioral sciences, right. Behaviorism, applied behavior, and they were developed over. We've all heard of many different scientists. B.F. Skinner, one of the fathers of that science, and Baldwin, Kasdan, a lot of famous names out there in developing the behavioral sciences. So SeaWorld was very good. Years ago, they went to a university in California, in fact, and got Dr. R.H. DeFran involved and said, we need to understand this better as a science. So how do we do that? And that was in the 70s. So they have taken the behavioral sciences and they have made it a part of their cultural, their organizational culture. So when I started, which was in 1987, I was handed a book by Alan Kasdan, and I had to study this book, and I had to know it, and I had to know the vocabulary, and I couldn't work with an animal if I couldn't answer some of my supervisor's questions about behavioral principles. So that was I'm blessed for that experience. I really am. It's laid the foundation for my understanding and application of working with animals my entire career.
So now looking at, like obviously SeaWorld gave you this great foundation, and as you said, it looked like it flew by in a blink of an eye. So I guess the question is why did you decide to leave SeaWorld?
Well, despite the rumors that SeaWorld trainers drive Ferraris and make a lot of money, I was starting a family at the time, and you can't raise a family on the money I was making at the time. So, I wanted to get out. I'm an entrepreneur by nature, and I wanted to get out and do some different things and try to be a little bit more successful in my personal financial career. So that's what it comes down to, really.
No, definitely. So I guess what do you miss most about your time at SeaWorld, or about, like, I guess when you worked at SeaWorld?
Well, easy. The animals, no question. The animals. You can. Well, we all know how therapeutic animals can be. You can spend just a little bit of time with an animal, and it's so stress relieving, And imagine working with animals like that day in and day out. So that's a thrill. I mean, I miss that every day. I miss that. But the good side is I still have dreams from time to time. I'd like to have them more, but I have dreams from time to time, and when I wake up, it feels like I literally just walked home from the park. So it's kind of cool.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
So have you taken your kids now to SeaWorld?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, many, many times. Yeah, but both my daughters have been in the water with many of the animals that I work with. Most of that outside of SeaWorld, but yeah, they've been around it their whole life.
That's awesome. All right, so that kind of brings the end to our segment one, where we talk about Mark's early career. Erin, do you see any questions or comments in the forum right now?
Nothing exactly relating to Mark's SeaWorld career, so a lot of those are going to fit more into like the segment two as we
Okay.
move into sort of some of the later stuff. So if anybody has any questions, any SeaWorld questions, last minute, feel free, get them up there right now. On the other ones, we'll wait, put a pin in until we get into more of the later stuff.
Yeah, so actually we are going to move into the the Keiko
Coco.
era.
Coco's a
Coco.
gorilla, Eric. Keiko, the whale.
So we're going to move into the Keiko era with Mark here. And so what we really want to talk about is, Mark, what brought you from Florida to Iceland? You know, like what was that driving force for you? And you know, was it a difficult choice for you?
It was, and I spent a lot of time writing about that in the early part of the book. It was a difficult choice, but what brought me from Florida to Iceland was I was working with my business partner, Rob and Friday, who is very well respected and known throughout the marine life field. And so, you know, but when he was first contacted about the project, this was, as you can imagine, I mean, back then, this was the only thing going on, and it was highly, highly controversial
Yeah.
and very much in the spotlight. So, you know, I thought, oh my gosh, we can't get involved in that. But at the same time, yeah, at the same time, I absolutely wanted to get involved in that because.
Yeah.
For better or worse, I'm one of those people that, you know, as soon as you tell me you can't do something, I'm first in line. So, um, yeah, and that may not always be a good thing, but you know, Robin and his contacts and
Yeah.
relationships is what really got us involved in the project, and of course, he brought me up there for the
Yeah.
behavioral background.
No, it's pretty incredible stuff. Um, and then, okay, so now when we look at, you know, you go from Florida, you go to Iceland again. For everyone, you really need to read Killing Keiko. While we're going to ask some questions about the book and some of Mark's experiences, the book is such a great emotional journey. And so, anyway,
Yeah.
what were your first impressions when you first laid your eyes on Keiko there in Iceland?
Yeah, well, you know, it was a tough time because you know there were trepidations about being involved in the project because of the groups that were spearheading the project. Now, the people on the front lines were people that we actually knew.
Yeah.
Robin actually knew, and they were from the zoological field.
Mhm.
So they were pretty grounded, very rational, and you know their approach to the project was based on their day-to-day experience and care of animals.
Yeah.
But the board of directors and the Free Willy Keiko Foundation was made up of some rather, not all, but some rather radical individuals. So, you know, you go in, you walk into this scene and you don't know what to expect. You don't know what to
Yeah.
think. You think you've burned all your bridges to your professional colleagues. And then when I saw Keiko, it just vanquished all of that. I mean, you know, here was something that was just so familiar to me. It just felt like I was at home. And Keiko, in and of himself, he was like no other killer whale I'd ever worked with. You know, at that time, I'd worked with about 22 different killer whales, babies, moms, you know, boys, girls, big males. And Keiko, I honestly don't think he knew he was a killer whale. I think he thought he was a big, you know, Saint Bernard or Great Pyrenees or something. But um, yeah,
Oh,
you could have put your baby in the water with him, and I
yeah.
would have. He was. I don't think he had a harmful bone in his body.
So you just answered one of our questions about sort of what were your first impressions when you met Keiko for the first time and when you saw this, you know, amazing sort of storied killer whale. So after working with him for so long, what was you think your one favorite memory of ever being with him and working with him?
Well, that's really hard, Aaron, to single out. There's several, and but I do have to admit that when understand that we approached the organization and told him that the odds are heavily against his success at this, but we were bound and determined to clear a path forward and give him every chance that possible. As long as everything was done in the best interest of Keiko. So, fast forward through many months of the project and trials and tribulations, and he succeeded in many areas beyond my wildest dreams. There's a section in the book where I talk about my wife visiting the project and the juxtaposition of her coming from working with, Telecom, large male, and seeing Keiko. And so her assessment really opened my eyes that, wow, we had come a long ways. But to answer your question, I would say I'd have to pick. There was a time when we were out in the in the open ocean, and this is really not only a really cool experience, but it is also very much telling of Keiko and who Keiko was. So we were out with the walk boat. We were not yet allowed to introduce him to wild whales by permit. We simply had to take him out to get him away from harbor construction.
Yeah.
So we would do these walks, and we would push him physically, and we would get him used to that open ocean environment. So we were going to do some sprints, and we did a few sprints up to 26 knots with the boats, and he disappeared. And as soon as we stopped, he popped up right beside the boat, and we thought, "There's no way." There's and so we figured it out pretty quickly, but he was drafting underneath the boat. He would literally put his belly smack up underneath the hull of the boat and get in that slipstream that the bow of the boat creates, and so it was effortless for him. He would just hop a ride, pop up like, what's next? I think that was pretty funny and pretty amazing experience.
What a clever guy.
Yeah.
So when you look back at your time and you look back, obviously everything went right, everything that went wrong. What are you most proud of about working with Keiko?
Well, I think for a long period of that portion of the project, we were, as a team, and not just me, but there were over 30 people involved in the front lines of the team, and that many of them almost all of them have become lifelong friends of mine.
Yeah.
And they were everyone was on the front lines was so invested, and those were often tough times, often very emotional. And letting go, succeeding at these little steps and looking like, it's time to let go, that wasn't easy. That went against everything, that you're made of. But I'd say that we really meticulously followed the rehabilitation, the behavioral rehabilitation, and we applied some principles of learning that had never been done before to the extent that we applied them.
Yeah.
And the results of that was just absolutely amazing. I'd say overall that's what I would be most proud of. How far we did get him.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. All right. Okay. So after you left Iceland, how long did it? After you left Iceland and after you were kind of getting back into like Florida life and kind of doing other things, how long did it take you to feel kind of normal again after that experience?
Well, physically several weeks, emotionally probably several years.
Wow.
Yeah, my wife's description is, she said anytime any of my friends or family talked about Keiko, I ground my teeth in my sleep for the next 3 nights. And by the way, I'm embarrassed to say that it took me pretty much 6 full years to write the book, and quite a few nights of grinding my teeth in that as well. But and everybody by the team, I'm not special. Everybody on the team that was there and a part of that process was deeply affected by it too.
All right, so Erin, do we have any questions now about Mark's time in Iceland and with Keiko from the audience?
Let's see. There's a couple further back. So a couple of people have expressed, sounds like Keiko was a joy to work with, especially once he got a little further along in the process. Somebody wants to know, in your opinion, your professional opinion, why do you think it was that Keiko ended up not joining any of the other pods that he came into contact with?
Yeah, I wish I could give you the answer to that in a very short, concise package, and I'll do my best. You have to begin by looking at the animal's learning history, and they're part of their learning history. Let's set aside the species, and that's what's called their phylogenetic history. Let's set that aside. Let's look at their learning history from birth. And you have to understand, you have to really analyze this. This is important because the idea behind the movie Free Willy was that nature's going to take over, that instinct is going to kick in, that spontaneous recovery is going to occur. But when you look at the makeup of Keiko's life from a behavioral discipline, when you forensically evaluate this, you have an animal that was collected probably at close to the age of 1. Now they say 2, but if you look at early pictures of him in Mexico, there's no way in the world that animal was 9 years old. Not at his size. He was only with other killer whales for about 6 years, and he was picked on and beat up that entire time. He was low man on the totem pole. So then in Mexico, he was isolated from other killer whales. He was with other marine mammals for short periods of time, but never with another killer whale. So, fast forward to Iceland, and you have this learning history, and regardless of how poor the conditions in Mexico were for a killer whale, he was clearly too big for that facility, and the facility was not designed or adequate for a killer whale. Outside of that has no bearing on the fact that Keiko's relationship with humans was immensely positive. So here you have this idea that his biological mother, that he's going to instantaneously recognize his biological mother over his 20-year foster family when he bumps into her in a crowd. I would argue anecdotally that Keiko probably had no idea what the killer whales were. Now, let me add one thing to that, because we're just skimming the surface here. There's a lot of details here we simply don't have time to cover. There were arguments that Keiko would have succeeded if he had met his family or members of his family pod, but in fact he did. We had we had done biopsy darting. We had identified, and they had identified multiple times, genomes from wild populations that Keiko was exposed to that were part of his lineage. So there's, the instinct is not some magical force that's going to kick in and take over learning.
Yeah.
I did not know that you did genetic testing and found that he had come into contact with family members. That's incredible. I didn't realize that was part of the equation at all.
Well, that's available, Erin, by the way, in the report done by National Marine Fisheries and the Greenland Institute. So the project, there was a lot of research surrounding the project. I mean, some of the individuals involved in the research part of it were meticulous about the data that they collected.
That's absolutely fascinating. Erin, do we have another question from someone else?
Any more fan questions? Let's see. I think there's one farther back. This is kind of an emotionally charged one, but I think a lot of people are wondering it, so I think I'm going to ask it anyway. Jessica would like to know if all of the different bacterial contaminants in the wild played a part in why Keiko ended up not surviving because his immune system was in such a different place, or if that wasn't a factor.
Well, I can't profess to know the answer to every question. What I can tell you is that medically, Keiko never should have been put in that position. And a lot of experts understood that. He had a chronic respiratory condition that recurred, that resurfaced almost every winter. In fact, he came close to dying multiple times and was only, sustained by heavy doses of antibiotics and antibacterials. He also had a contagious cutaneous papillomavirus, which is a threat to the wild population. So pretty irresponsible there. That's looking at the medical side of it. But when an animal, let's look at behavior again. When chronic negative stress is present, and we know this as humans, when chronic negative stress persists, it compromises our immune system, and in fact, it can be as lethal as a bullet to the head, and more, in fact, even more damaging because of the suffering induced not only by the stress but physically the manifestations of physical illness that come from that. So Keiko was absolutely put in a very high stressful situation. His entire learning history, a juxtaposition in contrast to his entire learning history. And he was also malnourished because of this idea that, let's keep him hungry so that he's encouraged to go out and forage on his own, which was never proven.
I will say, for anyone who has not read the book, the last 2 chapters will make you cry a lot.
Oh, man. You got tissues. It's... The way that Mark really tells the story makes you feel like you're standing there watching it, and it hits hard. It hits really hard. So if you haven't read it.
So before
I have to tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Eric. I have to tell you the irony of this is that I absolutely hate tragic stories. I have to, if you're going to tell a story, it should have a happy ending, right? So that's pretty ironic, but you're right. It was tough to write too.
But it's a very important tragic story to tell because we can have a happier ending since we know this story, I think. I definitely stand by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and again, I don't want to, for those that haven't read the book, I tried really hard to just simply tell the story. And leave most of my opinions for the author's note, which you can take or leave. But I will say this: that I do believe in reintroduction, and we need to specify the difference between release and reintroduction. And just to be quick about it, release is irresponsible. Reintroduction needs to be backed up by science, biologically significant, beneficial to the animal and to the wild population, and it needs to be done by relevant experts that know what they're doing. Yeah. This project was run by the decision makers of this project. It was run by people who had no experience with killer whales, no idea what they were doing. They should not, and they had the wrong agenda to begin with. So we do need to invest in the development of reintroduction because it's going to be, and we do it with many other species. It's a part of species preservation and wildlife management. And zoos have been extremely successful at this with over 19 different species. But cetaceans are a whole different ball of wax, largely because of the logistics, because of the difficulty of tracking them, and the social complexity. But we've got to develop that science because there are species out there that are only going to be preserved if we have that capability.
Okay. Oh, no, thank you, Mark, for that, because I think you hit on a lot of, because species preservation is a critical and vital thing facing our oceans, facing all the animals in our oceans, and I think, if we want to see long-term success, I think you're right. So we have a question from Dana who asked, do you believe if things went differently, Keiko could have been successfully released?
No, Dana, I don't think that he would be, reintegrated and thrive on his own ever. And I'll say that for 2 parts. One, medically, he needed sustenance because of his respiratory condition. And I think behaviorally, he was always going to seek out human attention.
Yeah.
And so I think he could have lived in the ocean with a base of operations and provided adequate and daily care.
Yeah.
It's not really about where he was, it's about the level of care that was required. So he should be alive today. By the way, Tillicum at SeaWorld of Florida here is roughly the same age as Keiko. Yeah. So, just to put that in perspective, I think Keiko should be alive today.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah. It's hard.
Erin, do we have any other fan questions on this topic?
There are fan questions coming up all the time. Let's see, what is a good one? So, with all of the different conditions that Keiko had and all of the different things pointing that he was not going to be successful in release, who made the determination to let him out anyway?
Well, there was a permit. There's a permit required for this. You can't just take an animal out and decide that, okay, they're ready to go. And the
Right.
permit was largely based on criteria that had been researched and provided in a technical report to the U.S. Navy in 1993 by researchers Brill and Friedel. Those criteria have become the standard for evaluating the viability of release of any animal, regardless of whether it's a rehab animal that's lived most of its life in the wild, or an animal that's been long-term in the care of man. So the criteria clearly showed that Keiko had not met. In fact, he didn't meet. He only met 2 out of the 9 criteria.
Wow.
Arguably, if I'm going to be kind, you could argue 3.
Yeah.
But he never met those criteria, and in fact, as soon as he engaged in seeking out human contact in Norway, that called for the intervention plan by the permit to be enacted, but they were outside of Icelandic jurisdiction, and of course that was never done. I'm sorry to get off. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
That was good, because it really talked about how there is an established criteria to follow in terms of releasing animals, and it was botched in this scenario, in a sense, because of this push. And that actually gets us to another fan question. Since Keiko was such a bad candidate for release, why was there such a big push to release him?
Well, Free Willy.
Yeah.
You have this is going to perhaps come across brash, but in this country and in many countries, TV and film is the lazy man's university. And so we watch these things and we get this idea in our head that that's the way life works, and life is just not that simple.
Yeah.
So this organization that took over was radically anti-zoological, and they had an agenda to prove to the world that they could release this animal, that they could have a storybook ending that matched that of Hollywood. And that's really the travesty, because it's not the fact that Keiko died. I mean, a lot of people say, well, he died free. He was never free. He was never free. He had the choice of other whales. He had the choice of a wide open ocean, and every single time, resolutely, without fail, he chose humans. He chose his human relationship, but he was denied that interaction. So it's not that he died. It is how he died and the suffering that was imposed over the last years of his life. And that's what comes out in this story, which, by the way, is not just me. As I mentioned, I have a lot of lifelong friends from the project. I had an enormous amount of help from them, from over 30 people. Some in very small ways, some in very big ways, contributed to this book. So,
I will say personally, I was very impressed while reading the book how much you actually cite, like, in the book. Because obviously I think everyone is very quick to dismiss anyone who is counter their own personal opinions, and I know people who have easily dismissed your book.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, confirmation bias. I know people, and I know I get very upset when I see people just dismiss your book, because I'm like, you haven't read it. And so, did you feel like you needed to cite things because you didn't want things to be dismissed, or why did you feel like you had to cite so many things in the book?
Eric, you'd have to give me an example. I don't feel like I approached it that way for any reason at all. Now, a lot of
the emails that you share in the book, for instance, I
wanted people. The editor took out a lot of emails. I had a lot more than that in there. I wanted people to see the emotion and what we were talking about at the time. I can describe it, but when you can read an email that happened in real time, at that time, boots on the ground, neck deep in it, that's a little bit more real. So I wanted that. I wanted that connection. And this kind of leads into why did I write the book? And I'll tell you, I knew always that this was an absolutely amazing story. That there are lessons yet to be learned from it, and honoring the people that committed their lives to Keiko there on the front lines. And honoring Keiko himself, and I just knew it was an incredible story that needed to be told. It would be an absolute injustice if what really happened wasn't told.
Yeah, I
agree, and so does Mary. She says that the citations were the bomb. So there's some.
All right, so
that's
now
awesome.
So we're going to move on to segment 3 here as we kind of wrap up. So segment 3, we want to talk a little bit about post-Keiko. And you already kind of answered the why now, why you've written this. And so so what did you do career-wise once you return, and what have you done for the past basically 10 years, and what projects have you been involved in that you feel you're very proud of?
Yeah, well, the one I'm involved in now, I'm really super proud of. I love it. But anyway, right after Iceland, I was, again, as I said, I've been riding on Robin Friday's coattails for much of my career. But he was contacted immediately and brought to Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, and of course brought me with him. Almost immediately, we had, and that's by the way, Harbor Branch had a cetacean. They run research up and down the Indian River Lagoon on the east coast of the United States, and a rescue and rehab facility. So immediately in the 2 years right after Keiko, we had several neonate baby bottlenose dolphins that we had to rehab. So yeah, if you want to get, the best medicine for your broken heart from the Keiko project is to work with some baby dolphins. So that was a lot of fun. But going to the future, what you talked about, Eric, and what's really fun that we're doing now as a part of that project in rescue and rehab. And the last 17 years of my career has been in the field, doing rescue and rehab. We developed an application, a database basically, and over the years it evolved, and today it's actually called ORCA, OERCA, but it's an acronym that just stands for Research and Conservation App. So, but we're developing parts of that app that we're going to make available worldwide. In many different languages, part of a citizen science program and a first responders rescue and support database, and just connectivity of the relevant expertise and people in the field that can respond to global stranding. So that's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. All right, here. Then, so now you mentioned the baby dolphins, but we want to know what other animal rescue efforts have you been involved in? Besides the baby dolphins.
Well, it's sort of serendipitous. You are part of a network, and I'm best described as a free agent. I am associated with a couple of different organizations, but available to, it's a small world. It's a small community, and we all know each other quite well. When you've been around long enough, you get phone calls when things happen. So, I've been fortunate to be involved in everything from pygmy sperm whales to Rizzos to dolphins to humpback. Unfortunately, though, that one ended up being a necropsy pretty quickly. But a lot of different species, and the animals that frequent our coast from the Florida east and west coast here.
That's cool. And then. Again, you already answered the book, the question, why now, and so really, what do you hope people take away when they finish reading this book, Mark?
Well, and let me add an addendum to that, Eric. I started the book in 2004, not long after I left the Keiko project, and I dabbled with it over the years. I struggled, trying to find my voice, I guess. and so I had the first draft of the book mostly completed about early 2009. Obviously, when the tragedy at SeaWorld occurred and all the controversy came out and Blackfish came out, there's no question that added urgency to completing the story, especially when this idea of rampant release of marine mammals started making its way to otherwise intelligent people like congressmen. So which, side note, I think that was a publicity stunt, but sorry for that. Yeah, and then you got me off track here. What was the other part of your question?
What do you want people to really take away? Because kind of like what you said, what I took away when I finished this book, first thought was never again. Never again.
Well, Erin, I don't want to go so far as to say that. I want to say that, listen, let me be perfectly practical about this. If somebody came to me and said, we want to create a rescue plan, a recovery plan, and let me just add a little backstory here from my perspective. We talk about conservation. We throw this word around to the point where I think most people don't really know what it means. I think conservation is what we do today to benefit our grandchildren and their children. But we are facing a time where we've got a freight train coming down the tracks that's a result of the industrial economy over the last 100 years. Nothing is going to stop that. I'm out there, I see it every day. You don't need science to see the devastation that's going on. Most people don't realize how bad things are in many regions of our oceans, especially coastal regions. We need to develop the science of reintroduction. It's very possible that we are our only ability to preserve a species is to create established breeding groups and be able to repopulate them back into the wild or relocate them. And the way that you would run a program like that is that you would begin it with that trajectory from day one. The animals in SeaWorld parks and parks like SeaWorld, that was never part of their trajectory. Human relationships were the top priority in those animals' development in their lives. So they are not candidates for this. But we do need to develop that science. So the takeaway for me, though, Erin, is I'd like people to understand that zoological sciences is a public asset, and it's one and the same with wildlife management. I take great offense at this, at people saying the word prison. I take great offense at this word captivity. This is a punitive word, and the framework of thinking sets this conversation off on the wrong foot to begin with. I have never spent a day of my career with an animal that was punished, isolated, deprived, or abused in any way, shape, or form. It is human care that has provided such a great lives for these animals and continues. And so I think we diminish that science and that capability and those resources when framework of thinking is used like that. It's not objective. So I hope people take away from the book and understand that our zoological base is absolutely critical to our future.
Oh, wow, Mark.
That was amazing.
No. And I think we all, I know Erin and I, we definitely agree with you, and I see zoos and people who work in zoological organizations as Earth's last great hope, and
yes.
I firmly believe that. So now that we're going to move on to just some wrap up and some fan Q&A here really quick. So Joseph Laughlin asks, and I think a lot of people just want to know this, and so I just want to get this one out of the way, Mark, what was your reaction when you first saw Blackfish?
Yeah, hi, Joseph. I'm sorry, Eric, was there a second part to that?
Nope.
Okay. I'll keep that one short. It was just absolute nausea.
Oh.
I mean, I have lived, and my wife and I combined have 23 years of water work experience, getting into the water with killer whales, thousands and thousands of interactions in the water. Um, when I was at SeaWorld, we were in the water for everything, everything. I mean, why
So I
would
get
you
that
do
out of
that?
the way.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so and not one single incident between us. So I watched this movie, and this movie convinces you that you couldn't survive a week at SeaWorld, and I can't reconcile that with the world I know. It was absolutely a public fraud, in my opinion.
Well, on the subject of Blackfish briefly, we have some people who want to know if you would like to make a movie out of killing Keiko to serve as the counterpoint to Blackfish.
No, Erin, if somebody wanted to make a movie about it, that's up to them. I have no interest in investing my time in countering Blackfish, or even wasting time on what I really think is senseless controversy.
Yeah.
There are serious people out there. There's a lot of work to be done. I just left a conference of 3,000 zoological professionals, and the work they're doing is absolutely amazing, inspiring. And here we are talking about killer whales, and quite frankly, let me put this into perspective here. We're talking about a handful
Yes.
of biologically, and it's from a scientist perspective, biologically insignificant small population of whales that are pampered. And by the way, I'm going to note that there is science right now today that is coming out that shows unequivocally that SeaWorld's population outperforms wild whales in lifespan longevity, infant mortality, and average age of death for animals that do die young. That science is peer-reviewed, and it will be out soon enough. So we'll deal with that later. But we've got 90. Here we are, dominated by this conversation.
Yeah.
And yet there are 96 elephants on the continent of Africa that are killed on average every day. That's one every 15 minutes, and yet you don't hear that conversation in the mainstream press. And why is that? Because for organizations that back movies like Blackfish, it doesn't earn them marketing or donation dollars.
Yeah.
SeaWorld has made Shamu such a household name that people like the producers of Blackfish and the ones that are pointing fingers at SeaWorld are riding on those marketing dollars. It is not animal welfare. I know we have this finger pointed at the dirty profit word all the time, but follow the money. Whether you call it profit or donation, both sides are guilty of that aspect.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Erin, do we have any more fan questions for Mark? Non-Blackfish.
I'm looking non-black. People are just enthralled. This is totally so good, so good. Let's see. I know this is jumping back a little bit, but a couple people have asked if you had a favorite animal you worked with at SeaWorld. That's pretty hard, I know.
Yeah. I'd get a lot of points if I said my wife, because I worked with her at SeaWorld.
That works.
Yeah, no, well, I'd have to say killer whales, really, as a general. I mean, they're so amazing. And I'm 6'2" and 220 pounds. It's kind of hard to do fun things with dolphins, but killer whales and toss me around like nothing. So yeah, but there's a few animals. There's a dolphin that comes to mind by the name of Goofy, who's still there. And Goofy is quite a character and taught me quite a few things over the years. So I cherish those, a lot of different relationships. Johnny the polar bear, worked with him a little bit. So.
Oh yeah.
That's cool. Erin, any more fan questions here as we wrap things up?
People are just starstruck and don't have any more.
Oh gosh.
Everyone is loving on just getting some sense in the world for a change. So
all right. Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Erin.
No, that's it.
All right. Well, I think we're going to be wrapping this up. So as we wrap it up, we first want to thank Mark for joining us on this live Q&A, and we want to thank everyone for participating, everyone who asked some awesome questions. And I do want to personally recommend everyone purchasing Killing Keiko right now.
Yeah.
It's available at Amazon.com. You can buy it at KillingKeiko.com. It's in hardback and paperback. You can actually get it at Barnes & Nobles too right now.
Yeah. And I believe also Kindle. Is it on Kindle now too?
It is, as of this past Monday. It's Kindle, iBook, and Nook and EPUB version.
So
yeah.
basically, you have no excuse whatsoever to not own this book.
Exactly.
You have to
true.
own this book.
You know,
I happen to know it's.
No, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Sorry, my mother convinced her local library to carry a copy as well. So.
So if anyone wants to convince their library to carry a copy, Mark, what do they need to do?
Just go in and talk to them.
All right, everyone. You have your task. Go to your local library and tell them to carry Killing Keiko. All right. So again, you have to go out and buy this book. It's a must-read. All the stories you've heard in this Q&A are just an intro and a taste of what Killing Keiko is like. Don't be afraid, again, that it is a tragic story. It's a story that you have to read. And there are some really great pictures in it.
Really do.
But I can't recommend this enough. Also, we want you to go on Twitter, follow Mark right now. He's at Killing Keiko. We also ask that you follow Awesome Ocean at One Awesome Ocean. And so
Awesome Oceans. One
Awesome Ocean. And then we're going to keep these Q&As coming. We're going to have one with Bridget Prittle Davis in a few weeks, and then we're going to have one hopefully with some people from the Hub SeaWorld Research Institute. And, I want to thank Mark for setting up a great tone here. And Mark, is there anything, maybe one last message you want to share, besides buy Killing Keiko?
Eric put me on the spot. No, I don't. I think that I like rational collaboration and a positive outlook towards our wildlife future. We got a lot of work to do. So I'd like to see us all steer away from, the controversy and really start doing the things that matter, and focusing on the ocean and where the real threats are. So that's probably where I'd leave it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I really thank you for delving back emotionally into everything, because, you just shared so much insight with everyone, and it was an honor to talk to you today. So thank you so much.
Gosh, thank you guys. It was a lot of fun being here, so I'll go grind my teeth tonight. But
all right. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining. Please keep on reading awesomeocean.com, and we hope you have an awesome day.